Hello everyone, my name is Emil Husted and I'm a PhD fellow at the Department of Organization at Copenhagen Business School. First of all, let me say thank you very much for allowing me to participate in your exciting conference by doing this short video presentation. I'm sorry that I cannot be there to discuss this highly interesting intersection between anarchism and critical management studies with you, but hopefully I'll get to meet some of you on other occasions as well. Now, this short presentation that I'll give is entitled Facebook's Influence on Anarchist Praxis in Protest Movement, the case of Occupy Wall Street. The story behind this presentation is that I recently authored a chapter for a forthcoming anthology called Civic Engagement and Social Media. In this chapter, I explore how the organizational structure of Occupy Wall Street was transformed during the movement's first year as a consequence of Occupy substituting their offline activities with purely online activities. This September has been exactly 3 years since thousands of frustrated citizens decided to occupy Zuccotti Park in Lower Manhattan as a way of displaying their dissatisfaction with what they considered a political system controlled by corporations. Now, in Zuccotti Park and later in similar settings around the world, these citizens created a kind of miniature democracy, replete with participatory practices and ideals of direct democracy. For instance, during general assemblies, they designed an advanced system of hand signals where one could clearly state whether one agreed with what was being said, opposed the message, or if one thought a point needed clarification. Another well-known example is that of the human microphone, where a person would speak at large gatherings and pause after every sentence to let the crowd amplify his or her voice. These participatory practices were, as far as I'm concerned, one of the main reasons why the movement became such a worldwide phenomenon, as we've seen. Now, returning to the transformation from an offline to an online movement, if we take a look at Occupy Wall Street's Facebook page and try to map the activity within the movement's first year, from fall 2011 to fall 2012, a curious pattern emerges. Take a look at this graph, which again is taken from my chapter. This figure visualizes the aggregated number of sharings and comments, here displayed in percentages, at the 20 most active posts on Occupy's Facebook page during 3 isolated time slots. Immediately we're confronted with drastic shifts in the frequency of the two activities. While the number of comments have decreased significantly, we see that the number of sharings has skyrocketed within the movement's first year. What this development seems to show is that simultaneously with Occupy's transition to an online movement, the practices of the individual participants changed as well. In 2011, when the movement still existed in the streets of New York City and elsewhere, Occupy's page witnessed a high frequency of active participation amongst the individual participants, here exemplified by comments. 1 year later, in 2012, when the entire movement had moved online, Occupy's page witnessed a significantly lower frequency of active participation and a much higher frequency of passive affirmation and amplifications, exemplified by sharings. I like to conceptualize as a drift from creation to amplification. Instead of actively participating in the mutual co-creation of content and meaning, individual members of Occupy has been turned into passive amplifiers of content distributed top-down by the administrators of the movement's Facebook page. But how then does this relate to the issue of anarchism? Well, as I see it, the case of Occupy Wall Street's transformation from an offline to an online movement clearly signaled a highly present danger for protest movements when engaging with social media technologies such as Facebook, namely the danger of undermining such movements' participatory and non-hierarchical structure, and in the end their anarchist principles. Well-known authors such as David Graeber, but also recently an Australian-based researcher named Morgan Rogers Gibson, has stressed the importance of acknowledging the anarchist roots of the Occupy movement. Throughout their writings, these authors emphasize how Occupy Wall Street is built on anarchist principles, not just because Occupy defies existing political institutions, and because they often refuse to acknowledge the legitimacy of the legal system, but also because the movement was structured in an effort to eliminate any kind of internal hierarchy. Let me just quote a recent article by Mr. Gibson called "The Anarchism of the Occupy Movement." Quote, Occupy's implementation of these participatory structures, for instance consensus-based decision-making, is compatible with the anarchist principles. Rejecting the distinction between leaders and followers, Occupy has exhibited a sophisticated appreciation of and dedication to the anarchical understanding of the confluence of means and ends. In demanding that participants speak with us, not for us, Occupy seeks to undermine the hierarchies inherent in representative democracy by consciously conflating, in its own practice, relations between leaders and the led." End quote. Now, I guess you probably know where I'm going with this. While it's arguably true what Gibson claims, that Occupy's offline practices were based on anarchist principles, I would argue that the online version of Occupy has completely forgotten about these ideals of equal participation and the conflation of leaders and the led. But how could this happen, one might ask? My guess, which certainly needs empirical backing, is that the Occupy movement has been so preoccupied with opposing what Gibson refers to as externally imposed hierarchies from, first of all, the state, and secondly, the economy, that they have turned a blind eye towards something as seemingly banal as social media. At first, Facebook might seem like such a participatory and non-hierarchical technology, since everyone can potentially participate in everything. But once you look a little closer, you realize that the technological affordances of Facebook quite often impose hierarchies on various social relations. Just follow any politician's Facebook page and I'm sure you'll know what I'm talking about. In the case of Occupy movement, Facebook has thus effectively contributed to placing those participatory structures that once made the movement a celebrated example of direct democracy with hierarchical structures resembling those of conventional politics. Social media is about socializing with friends and rediscovering old acquaintances. It's not a technology made for accommodating democratic deliberation or organizing principles based on anarchist thought. This, I believe, is a crucial point to keep in mind for future organizers of protest movements or other organizers that aims at eliminating internal hierarchies in this era of digital media. These were my reflections on anarchist praxis. I hope you find them at least somewhat useful. One question that I would like to pose to you guys is this: is anarchist theory, in fact, ill-equipped to critique the role of ICTs in imposing social hierarchies on different kinds of organizations? And if so, how might critical management studies help to ameliorate this gap? That's it for me. Thanks for listening. I look forward to hearing more about the outcome of the conference and particularly the stream about anarchism and critical management studies. If you have any questions or critical comments, please do send them my way. Thanks so much.